everybody, thanks for joining me here today. This is Nichole with Topaz, and today we are here for how to edit outdoor family portrait session. So in this session, we're going to be looking at a more simple portrait editing workflow, and that's what you see here on the screen right now. This is not going to include any skin smoothing going through Topaz Clean. And then we're going to move over to a more thorough or a workflow that has a few extra steps. And this is going to be the full family where I do some skin smoothing and shadow correction with the adults in this image. We are going to be using Photoshop CC and multiple Topaz programs, including Clarity, Lens Effects, and Clean. I think that's all the programs we're going to be covering here today. But I'm really excited to show you guys some of these before and afters. I think they're quite nice, and you can get them with just a few steps. So here's before. This is our before image. And actually, let me go to the very beginning image. Here's this original image here. And I just wanted to center the kids right in the middle of the frame. And I also wanted to get rid of this green spot, so it was kind of a win-win situation. So I ended up trimming off some of the top and some of the left-hand side to get to this image. And then I took it into Adobe Camera Raw. I had to shoot with JPEGs, a JPEG file format during this session, but you can still go into Adobe Camera Raw and use the tools within that filter, especially if you have presets in there that you know you want to apply to certain images. Going in there can really streamline your workflow. After that, I took it into Topaz Clarity. And Clarity, even in portraits, is something I constantly use. Now, a lot of people will say, why Clarity? Because Clarity is all about contrast, and especially micro contrast and mid-tone contrast. And a lot of the time, you're wanting to avoid that when it comes to portraits, especially with skin and shadows and things like that. But with Clarity, you can actually take out clarity as well. And because it's separated into all of these different types of contrast, you can just take out the clarity within the micro contrast. So here I added in just a little bit of clarity. We'll go through that. And then lens effects to give the kind of filtered look, a little bit washed out, really warm kind of filter, that toning filter. So we'll go through that process. And then I added a little levels layer to bring a little bit more of that washed out effect onto it. And then the last thing that we did for this workflow that we'll be doing is go back into Clarity and just sharpen up those eyes and use Clarity to do so. Let me show you. Here is before and after, and it's the mouth and eyes that I ended up sharpening up using Clarity. All right, so let's go ahead and just start from this background layer, and I'll walk through this workflow. I tend to take outdoor portraits. Actually, I usually never use a studio because I don't have a studio. I can set up a studio within my house, but I usually don't because I prefer natural light, and that's what you'll see majority of the time in these sessions if we're looking at portraits that I'll be using outdoor portraits. So I wanted to specify that. I think there are a few other steps that you might want to add into a studio workflow or a studio shot workflow, but it's basically going to be the same. You really want to just work on the overall image, and then specifically on your subjects, pay attention to skin and eyes and characteristics of their face and things like that. So that's really what we're going to be going through here today. So the first step that we did for this workflow was going to Adobe Camera Raw. So I'm just going to make a quick copy of this background layer by saying Control-J. It's Command-J on a Mac, and I'm going to name it ACR. I'll take that layer into Camera Raw, by going Filter, Camera Raw, Filter. Now you can take what I'm going to be doing in here and apply that with whatever program that you're using during this first step. Basically, this first step that I'm working on is just the overall exposure, the contrast, maybe adding in a little bit of saturation, a little bit of vibrance, just basic things that you can do throughout most programs. So within Camera Raw, I just want to take the exposure a little bit up. So I'm just going to come down here in the basic tab and take that exposure over to about, let's see here, maybe not that much, maybe just about 0.15 or so. That looks good. And I want to take the contrast down a little bit. I'm really paying attention to my histogram and trying to kind of get some of those shadows to move to the right and open up the shadows a little bit, but I want to maintain this nice darkness behind them. But one way to kind of give me a little bit more to work with as we go into clarity especially is to take the contrast here at this stage down just a touch. So I'm just going to take that maybe to -6 or so. Then we have our highlights. I'm going to take my highlights down and my shadows up just to get a little bit more information into those areas for me to go into clarity and work with a little bit more. You know, I'm happy with my white, so I'll just leave that right about at 0. Shadows I'm going to go ahead and take up maybe to about 15. And here I'm just opening up the shadows. With black shirts and things like that, it's important to still see texture. And this type of adjustment will really help with those opening up those darker areas. Now I'm going to head on down to my blacks here and do the same thing. Take that up. And I'll show you, I'm going to push that really high so you really see that. Camera Raw and other programs as well, when you break down the contrast into multiple sliders instead of just one contrast slider, you have a lot more control. So that's really why I go in here and just do that real quick. All right, now you can add clarity within Camera Raw or other programs, but because we are going into Topaz Clarity where you have a lot more control than one slider, like this clarity slider, I don't usually touch the clarity slider. Clarity has become Topaz Clarity has become a pretty important part of my workflow for every image, so I don't usually take that up. I do usually take vibrance up a touch, especially when it comes to portraiture. It really helps give a little bit of life to the skin without going oversaturated. So I like to take my vibrance up a little bit here, maybe add a touch of saturation. I can always work with saturation in other programs, so I don't want to really get it too high. And then I'm going to just follow the tabs over here on the up here on the tabs, and I'm not really going to play with my tone curve. I'm pretty happy with what's going on right now with my histogram and my actual image that I'm seeing. So I'm not going to worry about further working with that, shadows or highlights. With my amount or with my detail and sharpening, I don't really work with this within this program. I'm basically done except for the split toning. And toning is an important part of my personal workflow for portraits. I feel like toning gives you that extra something special that a client or your family will really say, hey, what did you do there? Or this looks great. And it can be subtle or more dramatic, but my personal preference is to usually get some warmth in the highlights and a little bit of coolness within the shadows. So I'm going to take my hue for the highlights over towards maybe an orange color here. That looks good. So about 42 for my hue, and then take the saturation up just a touch. And I'm paying attention to their skin especially because that's the most highlighted portion within this particular image, and I don't want to add too much, but it does give a really nice tone to their skin. So I'm just going to take that up, maybe about 15, that works. And then I'm going to take my shadow hue over to kind of a purple color. And we'll go through the same process with the saturation, taking that to the right. And as you take that up, you can see sometimes it's a little too heavy, so I'm going to take that back down. But I do like the purple and orange combo. That's really nice. about 9 works. I still don't, I like what's happening within the shadows, but I want it to be balanced more towards the highlights. So I'm going to take my balance and move that to the right. This balance allows for more of the orange tone to be applied in a larger portion of the tonal scale of your image. If you move this to the right, if you move it to the left, it'll the purple is going to be applied on more tones. So I'm just going to take that balance a little bit towards the right to kind of take some of that purple away and boost up that orange tone. So that works right there. And at this point, especially if I'm working on a set of images, what I end up doing is making a preset. So whatever program you're using for these basic edits, majority of them are going to allow you to make a preset. So that's what I would do and suggest, especially to streamline a portrait workflow. We all know that sitting there and hand editing every single one, it just takes a long time. So I always look for ways such as presets and things like that I can go quickly through my workflow. And maybe I might need to tweak a slider or two, but usually if it's a set of images from the same shoot, you can quickly apply those presets and be done. So here I'm just going to do a quick preset here. Oh, here I'll do something. I'll just say portrait 1 and say okay. And now it's available for me to use the next time I come in with the next image. So here I'm just going to press OK and get back into our Photoshop. And here's before and after. I'm very happy with what's happening here. So now the next step is to go into clarity. And I really wanted to get some pop on their clothes, but I want to avoid getting any sort of contrast enhancement on their skin because they have beautiful skin as is. They don't need any sort of work on their skin. So let's go ahead and make a quick copy of this layer, Control-J, Command-J on a Mac, and I'm going to double-click and rename this Clarity. And now we can go into Filter, Topaz Clarity. And again, Topaz Clarity will break your image down into different contrast levels. And you have 4 different levels: micro, low, medium, and high. Micro is going to really work on texture contrast. As you take that up, you'll start to see, if we scroll in, that it really affects the texture of things, including very soft transitions of contrast that are already on your image, such as skin and skies, and it will really boost that contrast up, which is great for things like foliage or cement, things that you really want to pull some contrast out of. But if you are not looking for that, then you don't want to work with that micro contrast. I'm going to double click that to get that back down to 0. With portraits, a lot of people don't know that you can use Clarity and do some amazing portrait editing even with skin. So we have a portrait category over here on the left-hand side. You can click that, and we have different presets for portraits. And one thing you'll notice as you click on these presets, their skin is not being affected. That's because if you look over here on the right-hand side on the dynamic micro contrast slider, it's actually negative on all of these presets. And what that will do is allow for you to get extra contrast in the midtones and high contrast areas, but still have no contrast enhancements on the skin, and actually it smooths out the skin whenever you take that micro contrast down. So you can always just come in here and choose one of these to start from. I'm going to go ahead and press Reset All and just work with the sliders over here so you can see exactly how I might do this from scratch. Let me press Reset All on the bottom right. And the first module here is the Clarity module. And what I do is I just start with the micro contrast. I'm going to go ahead and zoom out just by pressing Control- key really quickly. That's a good view for me right now. All right, so for my micro contrast, I am going to take it down because I know I'm going to put some low contrast in there, and so I'll just take that down maybe to about -0.2, and we'll just leave it there for now, see if we might need to take it even further down here in a moment. But look what it did. Here's before and after. And you might say, wait a minute, why is it darkening that background so much? Well, what micro contrast does is it takes the contrast of very close transitional areas, so very smooth areas, like again, sky and blurry areas, things that have very smooth tonal transitions, and we'll either increase the contrast or decrease the contrast. So when we decrease that contrast, it's going to take away some of the texture that are in those blurry areas and in the skin. So it'll start to darken that if it's already dark like it was. But now I want to boost up contrast. So that's a really, the low and medium contrast will work on your mid-tone areas, and it's a really nice option for getting a good boost in your backgrounds and surroundings for your portraits without affecting their skin. So because we've already taken that micro contrast down. So I'm going to take this low contrast, maybe I'm going to take this up real high so you can kind of see what I'm talking about before and after. This is starting to affect their skin because it's so high, but it would be much worse if that micro contrast wasn't down. So I'm going to take this back down to maybe about 0.1 or 0.13, that's fine, before and after. Okay, now we're at our medium contrast. Medium contrast with portraits. Here is a very awesome tip. Under eye shadows. This is something that we don't really have to worry about here in this particular image because they have great young skin, but as we age and your eyes start to get those dark circles. If you find yourself taking a picture or editing a picture with somebody who has those darker circles under their eyes or shadow areas, this medium contrast slider is your best friend. So if you take that to the left, it will minimize the contrast between that larger mid-tone contrast transitions, but just know that, and I'll show it in the next one with the adults, just know that medium contrast pretty much with eyes and skin, it's a really good one for, if you take it to the left, to eliminate those shadows or actually make them better in a very natural way. Now we come down to our high contrast. Because I wanted to maintain a little bit of texture and detail here in my shadows and the backgrounds, I want to take my high contrast to the left. The high contrast is going to work on the very darkest areas and the very brightest areas. So as I take it to the left, it's going to open up my shadows and it's going to bring more detail into my highlights. So I'm going to take this down quite a bit, maybe close to about 0.5, negative 0.5. And you can see it brought back some of that detail and information within that shadow area, but not enough that it's distracting. So here's before, here's after. Pretty happy with what's going on here. Now we have our tone level. The tone level gives you one more area of control. You have your black level, midtones, and white level. I'm going to open up my blacks even just a touch more by taking that black level to the right. So here's before and after, just kind of evening everything out, balancing everything out. Midtones I'll leave alone. I'm pretty happy with my midtones. And my white level, because I'm kind of going for a specific look, which is more of some kind of washed out, not necessarily washed out, but a lighter look for their skin tone, kind of that warm yellow haze that I was talking about. But I wanted to kind of brighten up and get a little bit more of the highlights to stand out. So I can do that by taking my white level to the right, and it's just going to increase the white level area and really drive my eye towards where I want it to go. So 0.16, that seems pretty good. So here's before, here's after. I'm pretty happy there. Now I'm going to move on to the Hsl filter, which is the second module within Topaz Clarity. If you're not familiar with this, it's fantastic, especially for portraits, because what we do is break down the image into 8 different color ranges, including orange. And orange is going to be a great slider for all types of skin tones to either change the hue of it, which sometimes maybe it's a little too red, coming in and actually adding a little bit, going to the right will give you a little bit more yellow or green, so you can come in and shift the hue very easily. But I like to work with the saturation and luminance, especially within the Hsl filter. So let's go to the saturation and just start playing. I don't really want to take my overall saturation up, but if I did, I can do so very easily because we have a 9th slider down here at the bottom where you can just take that, add or subtract more or desaturate. But I want to go ahead and go individually through the sliders. So I'd like to take maybe the red actually to the left and take down some of the saturation of red. So let's just take that to the left. And this is a great one to know about, let's say if somebody has really rosy cheeks because it's cold outside and you don't want it to be too red, or maybe they actually have rosé, something, you know, where their skin has some red spots. Just taking out, taking that red saturation slider to the left will help that. And then you can still add some saturation to the skin by taking the orange slider to the right. These are very subtle moves. I'll show you these before and afters here. Here's before and after. It's very, very subtle, but that's what this type of editing is all about. So I'll take that up to about 0.03. Yellow I'm going to take up as well. Just add a little bit of extra saturation there. Maybe the aqua, I'll take that up. I have some aqua undertones here, especially in the background I kind of like. But there's a lot of blue coming in the black, so maybe I'll actually take the blue slider to the left. So you can come in and just be very specific about all the different ranges that you can do. Now we have our luminosity, where you can boost the brightness of certain color ranges. So this is really nice for portrait editing, again, with the skin tones. That orange slider will allow you to kind of brighten their faces and get some nice brightness to their skin without brightening the whole image. So I'm going to take that up to maybe about 0.05. You can really tell this adjustment as you go. I'm also going to take the red up just a touch. Maybe the yellow too. I'd like to take my green luminosity down to kind of get my eye to stop going up here to the green patches and just get a little bit more depth to the vines here below as well. So I'll take the green down. That's nice. And then the blue, I'll take that down just a touch as well. And I'm pretty done here. Let me show you this before and after. Just the hue, saturation, and luminance adjustments. Here's before and after. It's subtle, but it does make a difference. Here's before clarity and after clarity. Let me show you that one more time, before and after. So I'm going to go ahead and press OK and get back into Photoshop. And the next step that I have added to my workflow lately, because I really like the presets that are already in there. And oh, I should have saved a preset. That would have made it much simpler for the next round. And that's what I always suggest you do. You can save a preset within Topaz Clarity by clicking on the plus button, and I'll show you how to do that when we take the next image in there. But the next step here is going to be lens effects. So I'm just going to do another quick copy and call that lens effects. And I'd like to add just kind of a soft, warm tone, and I have a favorite filter or favorite toning filter within lens effects that I always think of when it comes to portraits, so, or a lot of my images actually. So lens effects, let's go ahead and go filter, Topaz Labs lens effects. And lens effects is basically a digital darkroom, I guess, or a digital camera bag. That's a better way to say it, because it has all of these simulations of actual lenses, actual blur that comes for certain types of lenses, different camera effects coming from real life effects that you can get, different filters such as graduated neutral density and things like that. You can add a reflector filter, which is great for getting a little bit of that reflective light into certain areas. That's really awesome for portraits, but I like to use it on my portraits for some of the toning capabilities, because we have very easy ways to add customized tone here. I love the camera toy actions because it has my favorite toning preset, and it also gives me a couple more options over here on the right. So I'm just going to click there, the soft and dreamy preset. And I love it because it just kind of washes things out, but in a very, very nice way. And now it also blurs up your image. So immediately I go over to Toy Camera Aberrations and take that camera shake out. And now I have this kind of unique tone and look to this image, but I want to actually make it my own, and more specifically, I want to get a good preset available to add or to easily apply it to other images in this shoot. So one thing is I don't like how strong the vignette is, so I'm just going to take that to the right to lighten it up. If you keep taking it to the right, it's going to start brightening and going white. So you can do quite a bit of things here. Here's before and after. I'm liking what's happening. I'm going to go ahead and take the grain out. I don't want to add grain in this image. Then we come down to our placement adjustments, which I don't really need at this point. Placement adjustments are going to give you the tools to move the certain tones around. There's two color casts that are being applied in this image, and those are going to be determined by region A and region B color cast tabs here. But then if you want to place it in certain areas of your image, you can change the region size, transition, and angle. Let's go down to the color casts first, and I'll show you what's going on there. So within the region A color cast, you see as you take a look at all of the different sliders, it's broken down into 6 different types of cast: cyan, red, magenta, green, yellow, and blue. And here you can see the yellow is pushed up the most. There's some blue undertones kind of happening, and that's coming from our blue cast. The same is going to be happening within the region B colors, because I see a lot of yellow throughout this whole thing. So a lot of yellow being added in this region B. Let's go back up to region A though, and that's going to be the top of the image. Because it's the top of the image where it's all black up there, I'm actually fairly happy with that. So let's go back down to region B. And here I can play around. I think I'm going to take a little of that magenta. I'll leave the magenta there. Let's see here. Take some of that yellow out, just a touch. Yeah, that's nice. I think I'm going to add a little bit of blue as well. I like that. Okay, so you can really manipulate your tone very easily, or custom tone very easily, and apply it very quickly within this program. Here's before, here's after. I really like what's happening. I also have some image adjustments down here at the bottom of the tab where I can change anything that the application of color tone on your image might be changing negatively. So if you need to change your brightness or contrast or saturation, your shadows or highlights, you can easily do so. I'm actually pretty happy with them for this image, so I'm going to go ahead over here to the left bottom side and press save. And I'm going to save this preset as Portrait 1. And I'll say OK, and you can see it's added down here. And now I can go directly to this preset with my next image and apply the same tone very easily on this whole set of images. So here I'm going to press OK and get back into. So at this point I'm really happy where I am, but I do want to kind of get my midtones maybe to go up a little. So I'm just going to do a quick levels adjustment. That's what I did before. So actually I'll use, levels is fine. Just take this midtones just a little bit to the left. I'm liking that. Here's before and after. And then the last step here for me was going back into Topaz Clarity and using the masking available within Topaz Clarity to selectively apply some nice micro contrast and low contrast to the eyes and mouth, just to get a little bit more detail. So I want to go ahead and show that step as well, but I want to take the image that actually has the levels adjustment applied to it that we're looking at here right now. So I'm going to do a stamp layer. So the way that I'm going to do that is Control-Alt-Shift-E, and that's going to give me a new layer, 100% opacity of what I was just looking at. All of the layers below basically merged into one new layer that was placed on top of where I was. And now I can take that into Topaz Labs Clarity and get that little micro adjustment that I'm looking for, and then apply it through our masking capabilities here. So I'm going to press Reset All, come into Clarity, and I'm going to get closer into their faces and just take the clear micro contrast up, maybe even a little bit of low contrast. I'm going to take the high contrast down a touch, maybe the medium contrast as well. And I'm just looking at the eyes and lips. I just want to get a little bit of extra detail, a little bit of extra pop there. Not paying attention to what negative things it's doing to the rest of my image. Here I'm going to take my black level up a touch, get some of the color back into their eyes. There we go. And midtones. Now you can do this in several different ways, but the important thing to remember is that actually coming in and sharpening up the eyes and mouth and those types of areas, especially if you've done any smoothing on your image, are going to be really important for portraits. So people's eyes are really the soul of the image, and that's where people's eyes, viewers' eyes will go. So let me go ahead and come down to my mask, and what I'm going to do is go into the hide mode and come over here to this icon. It looks like kind of a square with a triangle right there. Just click on that. It's the invert icon, but it will apply either the black mask, which will hide everything, or a white mask, which will reveal everything. So we want to hide everything and only reveal the eyes and the mouth. So I'm going to invert that to black. And then I'm going to push on the reveal brush or the reveal color here, so I know my brush or any adjustments I make now are going to be white. And we're in our brush panel. You can tell because the brush icon is selected there. And I don't want an edge-aware brush for these small adjustments. A normal brush with a really soft feathered edge should do just fine. But I am going to take my strength down to about 0.5 for now. I'm going to take my brush size way down, because it's small areas, and my hardness, I want to make sure I have a really soft brush going in there. So I'm pretty happy with the size of brush. Oh, we went down one more. There we go. And now I'm just going to paint in white to reveal the adjustments we did for the eyes and mouth. And I'm working on the little boy first, and it's pretty heavy-handed right now. I would be more subtle about it and a little bit more careful with this brush, but I want to go ahead and get to the other workflow as well. So, but you can definitely tell more detail and contrast is coming into those eyes and mouth areas. Here's before and after. Again, before and after. Again, this is applied a little bit heavy for me, but I'm just going to press OK because that is how I would end the workflow for this image. At this point, I would save it as a layered file so I could go back in and edit it if need be, and then save it as a flattened file at the size I wanted to print it out at, or at multiple sizes for my clients. So at that point, let's see here. Let's go ahead and go into our other workflow. I hope that gave you a good, simple workflow ideas. This is basically going to be very, very similar to the overall workflow we just looked at. Let me go ahead and show you this whole before and after first. This is was actually the first shot that I took that day, and I was actually just doing a light test, and wouldn't you know it, I loved the way that they were looking for this particular shot, but my exposure was not correct. So I actually started off with kind of a badly exposed image here, but I ended up at a place where I liked and a place that matched where my other ones were going. So I want to go ahead and show you the full process here. Here is my background image again, and then I took it into ACR to really work with that exposure and histogram to kind of even it out, and it really became pretty bland at that point within ACR. And then I had Topaz Clean to clean up skin, and I applied it selectively just to the adults' faces because the kids do not need it. So you can see here, here's before and then after. Topaz Clean is great because it will remove or soften very small texture, but still leave larger texture elements that actually make up somebody's characteristics of their face. You don't want to remove things like laugh lines but it allows for you to just kind of get a nice, smooth, clean skin really easily. So here's before and after. And then I took it into Topaz Clarity. Here's Clarity. just popped everything out a little bit. It also opened up shadow areas on the eyes, so we'll work through that for our adults here. Let me show you that one more time, before and after. Then I went with lens effects to get that filter applied on there. Opened up the levels a little bit, and then took it into clarity to get, again, for the eyes. Then I did a stamp layer to end, and realized that after I applied this really yellow filter to this image that I had accidentally kind of applied yellow to their teeth as well. So it looks pretty unnatural and not very nice. So at this stage, because I had already gone through this process and lens effects was down here in my workflow and I didn't want to go all the way back down to the step, I went ahead and just did a selective color adjustment on my neutral tones and just put a mask and only affected the teeth. So that was the ending move. Here's before and after, just to get that natural white color back. So we can start here from the background layer. And the great thing here is we have presets in all the programs. Now, going into Adobe Camera Raw, we are going to have to work with this one separately. We can start out at the preset, but because it's a very different type of exposure from the rest of the set of images, it needs its own work, but we can work with it quickly. So I'm going to go through this process much more quick than I did last time. So here's the ACR. I'm just going to go in and Camera Raw filter. The first thing I'm going to do is come over here to my presets tab and go to portrait 1 and see what happened. And I say, oh, okay, well, I like it to a point. I like the actual toning that's going on and the split toning, but it's not solving the issue yet of my exposure. So I'm going to open up the first tab, the basic tab, and just come down to my exposure and move that towards the left. And that, as you can see, the histogram just starts moving towards the left, and those highlights kind of stop blowing out so much. So you can really push that where you need it to go, and it really handles it in a very nice way. I'm going to take it down to about 0.7. That should work fine. Contrast is working fine. The highlights, I'll take those down just a touch more. And now my indicator that was saying that I had some information loss in my highlights is now off. So that tells me I've got a pretty good histogram going now. I'm still going to take my whites down a touch more because I know I'm going to take this into clarity to get a pop. So I want to have as much information to work with as possible, or at least have kind of a good clean slate to take in there and play with. I don't want to have a super contrasty image yet. So here we are at the shadows. I'm fairly happy with that, but I think I am going to take that up just a touch because they're all wearing black. We're losing some of the detail, and I want to make sure to keep that. Take both the black and the shadows up just a touch more. Clarity I don't want to touch. Vibrance and saturation I'm happy with. So I'm going to just press OK and get back into the program. And now we have our ACR, or our Adobe Camera Raw layer. Here's before, here's after. Now I'm going to make a quick copy just by pressing Control J again, and we're going to jump into clarity. And because I was just in clarity and I just applied that particular settings to the last image, it's going to have sticky settings like the rest of our programs do. So it's going to apply the same settings. So let's go ahead and start from a portrait 1 presets. That's good, because that's going to take my micro contrast down and allow for me to smooth out the skin. Let's see, do I want portrait 1, portrait 2, or portrait 3? I think I'm going to stick with portrait 1 to start off with. Yes. Okay, here's before, here's after. You can already see the skin is starting to smooth out, which is nice, but you still have a lot of nice pop going on. Let me go back just a touch. There we go. Okay, so micro contrast down, low contrast, fairly happy with, but I'm still seeing a lot of contrast in shadow areas such as under the adult male's eyes and around the eyes. So remember me talking about that medium contrast slider? Instead of going to the right and increasing that contrast of that particular tone, I'm going to go ahead and go to the left. And what that's going to do is open up those areas and get less contrasty in that particular region of tone. Here's before and after, but it does it in a very natural way. So it doesn't feel like you went in and you dodged and really worked on it, but you can come to the left and really open up those areas. Here's before and after. But if you still want to add a lot of pop, you can take that low contrast up and get a lot of pop coming through in the background. But again, you still have open shadow areas that might have been distracting. So I'm liking this. I don't want to take away that much medium contrast, and I also don't want to add that much low contrast. Before and after. I want to take out some of my high contrast as well. A little more detail in their clothes. Before and after. Not really happy with the mid-tone adjustment, so I'm going to take that up. And remember, we started from a preset, so that's why I'm kind of just tweaking instead of starting from scratch. Here's before, here's after. I'm liking what's happening, so now that I've kind of balanced everything out and opened up the shadows, as well as getting some nice pop in certain areas, I'm ready to press OK and move on to the next step. The next step for this particular workflow is going to be Topaz Clean. I do clean before I do any sort of toning or custom toning on top of it. So let's go ahead and actually I should have done it before I even did clarity, but that's okay. We've already done that step. So let's go ahead and make a Control J, say clean, and go into Topaz Clean. Topaz Clean is a texture program. It's about texture and edges. So it's an artistic program that you can create things like cartoons and squiggly lines and all sorts of different looks. But one area that it really, really is awesome on is skin. So we actually have a collection up here, and I highly suggest that you start from that area. I always do, because the presets, you really have to know how to work with them over here on the right-hand side to get to the point that a lot of these presets start at. So we've already done most of the work for you. You can just tweak. So I really like the skin smoothing natural. Here's before and after. It's a very subtle one. It's in this latest version of Clean. But I'm going to go ahead and look at the adults' faces. It's at 100% right now. Here's before and after. So again, you get really subtle adjustments with these presets, so that's nice. There's a lot of smoothing out here, again, before and after, but you still have the stronger elements of the face. Now you can come in here and increase the strength or change the threshold. The threshold I end up changing more than the strength during these presets because it allows for me to change the size of the detail that's going to be changed. So it's really helpful for larger elements that I want to smooth out, such as maybe sunspots or things like that, versus just pores. So as you take this to the right, you'll usually see it go a little bit more smooth. And then as you take it to the left, you'll see certain elements start to pop back out. So I'm going to keep that about where it was. I liked it. Here's before again and after. The other thing that you might want to know about is coming down to here into textures. Texture allows for that natural texture of skin to be applied back after the cleaning effect has taken place. So if we don't have any texture and we take that out, then all of a sudden you start to get this really flat, fake look. So the texture is really important. But if you find that too much texture is coming back and you're saying, well, that didn't clean up very well, just open up that texture tab and take that texture tab to the left, and you will remove some of the texture that's coming back in. You can also boost it up, and the boost is great for pores because it works on the very small texture within your image. So as you take that to the right, you'll see the very, very, very small texture start to come through, but again, it's a very natural way. So you can get very natural skin texture back in quickly using this. This is the size of the texture as well is important for these presets. It's usually set about at 3 because it's that's going to be the best setting for pores that we have found, but you can change that and get the different size textures to be brought back into the image. But I like it right about 3. And I actually want to bring back a tiny bit more texture because I feel like it got a little bit too flat, and I'm happy. Here's before, Here's after. I'm going to press OK. And the problem is that it was applied to the whole image. We do not have masking capability within Topaz Clean. So if you're working with Topaz Clean as a skin smoothing tool, you will need to have a masking capability within your host program. So within Photoshop, what I'll do is just go ahead and apply a mask. And it's going to apply white. I'm just going to click on that mask and a double click to pull up the menu and just invert it, and I'm going to apply black. So now it's hiding everything. That whole clean layer is now hidden until I can paint it back. So now if I go scroll back in, you can see that it is not smooth anymore. The skin and the picture is back to where it was prior. So now I can use a white brush and paint on my black mask back on the skin. So let me go ahead and grab the brush, just change the brush size. I'm going to go quickly through the rest of this. I'm going to take this to about 50% and just apply it on the areas where I want to. Actually, I'll go to 100% just so you can see and we can go through. I'm going to apply it on the two adults, and I'm just going to go on the skin itself, avoiding the mouth, the eyes, and hair, just on the skin. Come over here on the left and work on her as well, and it just does it in a very natural way. I really love Clean for portrait editing. It takes it a step further, or definitely helps when you're working with adults, because Clarity can help with that micro contrast to the left, but Clean really gives you the opportunity to come in and really clean up the skin in a nice way, in a natural way. And that's the most important thing, and for me, is that it looks good. It doesn't look fake, but they look the best they can. So here's before and after. So after this, I would take it into Topaz Lens Effects. Let me go ahead and do a stamp layer here. So Control-Alt-Shift-E. Oopsie daisy. Did not mean to do that. There we go. So we're back to the stamp layer. And I'm going to go Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Lens Effects, and just apply the preset that I created with the last image. So here's my Portrait 1 preset. I'm done. I press OK. Very simple once you have a certain look to apply those presets. Now, if you want to tweak it, you can, but we're getting to the end of the hour, so I want to go ahead and wrap up in the next few minutes. So I'm just going pretty quick here. Let me go ahead and make sure that I name this layer, though, Lens Effects. And for this particular image, I feel like it's applied a little too heavy, so I'm just going to take the opacity level and maybe take that back down to maybe 60, so I still get the same type of look, but it's not applied as heavy to the image. And now, because I have an opacity of lower than 100, I'm going to do another stamp layer to actually get my next layer. Control-Alt-Shift-E. There we go. And for this one, I would go through the process of getting the eyes and mouth and features a little bit more sharpened without sharpening the face, and that's where I would go next here, but I'm not going to worry about that right now since we are at the end of the hour and I've already gone through that in the last one. Really I wanted to show you within this workflow is Topaz Clean and working with it in a little bit more of a complex way than just that more simplified workflow we worked on first. The last thing that I was going to do, other than the clarity for the eyes, was come into the levels and just take the midtones up. So I'll open that up so you can see what I did there. I went to 110 instead of just 1. And then the selective color adjustment was the last thing that I did. And I'm just going to double click so you can kind of see that adjustment. What I had worked on was just the neutrals and taking the black levels to the left to add in some white, and that worked well for the teeth color. And then I put a mask on that because it really affected the rest of the image as well, and I just painted it back into the teeth. So that is a more complex workflow and a more simple workflow. I hope this gave you some good ideas and tricks using these programs on how to edit your outdoor portrait images. Thank you again for coming, and I hope again this gives you some good ideas or some tips on how to use Topaz in your outdoor portrait sessions. All right, thanks everyone, and we'll see you on Thursday. Bye-bye.